I'm obviously Andrea, Kilo 2 Echo Zulu, and today we're going to talk about VHF roving. There are mobile ops and other contests like specifically the state QSO parties. Many of those encourage stations to operate mobile or to rove between different counties to activate all those counties. I should not turn my head at the same time here. Before we get into the VHF roving, however, we need a little primer here on weak signal VHF, UHF, and microwaves. And when I say VHF roving or VHF, I'm generically speaking VHF, UHF, microwaves, all those bands apply. So for a little primer here, what does weak signal VHF mean? Many associate VHF with line of sight and therefore very limited ranges, and therefore you use repeater systems. So you're using your FM radio, your D-Star, DMR, all the things that Rio was just talking about. And maybe even link repeater systems or satellites. And so it's often viewed as a utilitarian kind of communications, and not so much direct person-to-person, although there is some of that. Weak signal involves modes on VHF and UHF frequencies that are more associated with HF, such as single sideband, such as CW, and then digital modes such as FT8. You could even have, drawing a blank right now, but like RIDI type modes. There's also some other specialized modes that you'll see that fall in that weak signal category, such as moon bounce or meteor scatter. Weak signal modes allow communication via propagation modes on VHF and UHF that are usually not strong enough for FM and related modes. Usually doesn't mean always, and there's, I'm sure some people have either had the experience or heard of somebody talking on a repeater 500 miles away or 1,000 miles away on 2 meters because there was a really big opening on 2 meters, be it some E-skip, a rare E-skip opening, or a very good tropo condition. But a lot of times the weak signal modes are just too weak for FM. You need quite a bit of signal for web FM, D-Star, etc. to be able to decode. The bread and butter, so to speak, on VHF, UHF weak signal is, not to that slide yet, sorry. One mode is E-skip. This is most prominent on 6 meters. It does happen on 2 meters, and I know people have experienced it up in 1¼ meters, although I can't say anybody's seen it up at 70 centimeters. But with E-skip, you can get typical skip distances, 700 to 1,000 miles. You can get multiple hops and get even further distances. And multi-hop E-skip is not particularly rare. It's most common over the summertime. Now, day in and day out on VHF, UHF, the bread and butter propagation mode is tropospheric scatter, also referred to as troposcatter, or as most weak signal ops will just simply say tropo. And this is the scattering or bending of VHF, UHF microwave signals through the atmosphere. Often thermal layers on the atmosphere will enhance conditions a lot more. Typically, people use FM, only experience ranges 50 miles, maybe 100 miles. If you're on a hilltop, you can get a good distance. With troposcatter, using a small beam, getting 150 miles is not a big deal. When I had omnidirectional antennas only on my mobile, I expected to be able to reach stations 150 miles away. And that's driving down the road. Now, typically, they may be using a beam or a fixed station. Mobile and mobile wouldn't quite be that. But you get quite a bit more than typical FM. Good fixed stations are just moderately decent fixed stations. Can easily expect to get 250 miles through tropo conditions. Good contest capable stations can do 400 to 500 miles on 2 meters, even up on 70 centimeters, and expect that to do that almost any time of day or night. When conditions get better, it extends those ranges and can go much further out. The map I have here on the previous page, this shows an opening. I forget what the website is, but you can go look and it'll have color bands showing where people are experiencing openings.
Is that mountainlink.k12.us?
I don't know.
I think there's one, I think that looks like that.
So, and this image here shows the number of repeaters, kind of line of sight, while troposcatter lets you skip over a lot of that. Another mode, it's a variation on the troposcatter, which is tropospheric ducting. And with ducting, the signal goes up in the atmosphere and gets trapped between a couple thermal layers and kind of bounces back and forth before coming back down to the Earth. And so you can get very long distances. One of the longest known ducts that regularly forms is between Hawaii and California. That's got to be at least a couple thousand miles. I don't know the distance offhand. And that's one that stations regularly use, and they can run 2 meters all the way up to the microwaves on that duct. There's also, well, people have been trying to establish between North America, or the Americas, and Europe, a 2 meter or higher frequency contact. It has not yet been achieved. It's been done through other modes, like some E-skip or so on. There was somebody who thought they did it once, but it was, with some analysis, found out it was scatter off the International Space Station. Wayne, N6NB, I'll mention a couple times here, there's D44 Charlie, where's that, Rhea?
That's Cape Verde.
Cape Verde?
Yeah.
Okay. Stations on a beacon on that island was picked up at, off the coast of Venezuela, one of the islands there. And and very, very strong signals. So there's another duct that opens up. That one's very rare, but that one is believed will probably set a new record across the Atlantic. Other modes, meteor scatter. Meteor going into the atmosphere can generate small bursts of transmission. In the old days, you had to wait for meteors that give you a couple seconds, so you get your call sign through, and people worked that. Starting in the 80s, the Europeans started recording CW on loops, high speed, and they would play tape for 15 minutes at a time, just kind of repeating the call sign, and then people distance would be listening, and then they would go and play the recording slow to see if anything was received, and then send something back. Nowadays, we have computers that do that, and they resend the data really, really fast, and you transmit for 1 minute, and then the other person, if they get it decoded, having operated this mode, you're sitting there listening to dead air, and all of a sudden you hear, and then it pops up on the screen, decodes, and then the mode will send back. It's very much like FT8 in terms of that. So again, modern technology making this mode practical. Again, typical range is about 700 to 1,000 miles. 1,400 miles is about the limit. Earth communications, bouncing a signal. Again, digital has moved this from being big antenna arrays, high power, to now with 200 watts and a single long Yagi, you can manage some moon bounce contacts with some stations. And last but not least, I want to mention Maidenhead grid squares. If you're not familiar with these already, and I'm not sure our grid square here, we're somewhere around
15.
Okay, Echo Mike 15. That's down there in Oklahoma. Most people refer to the 4-digit grid square, which is 2 letters and 2 numbers. And instead of using states, which is kind of unfair for the western states, where the state's so big, and the eastern ones have a bunch real close, for multipliers, grid squares have become the thing for contests to use for identifying location. When finer precision is needed, like for pointing antennas or calculating distance, usually a 6-digit grid square is used. Like I live in Fox Nancy 21 Quebec Alpha, and it just is a repeating system. It's just a finer coordinate there. And these are used for multipliers in contests typically, and is usually the basis of exchange. And for people using FT8, there's also grid squares is what they exchange. Okay, now we're back to the presentation on roving here. And I've got to watch my time. What is a rover and what is roving? Okay, in the context I'm talking here, there's a rover category in most VHF contests. And rover simply denotes that station moves or rows from one grid square to another. And unlike fixed stations that can only make contact with another fixed station once per band, typically you can work on 2, 1 1/4, 70 centimeters. More bands you got, the more contacts you can work on. You get more multipliers for that too. When a rover changes grids, rover can work everybody again. This makes rovers very popular during the contests. And roving is a gerund. Roving also refers to the process of moving from grid to grid, and it can also describe a rover's overall participation. Like I might say, I'm going to be roving in the September VHF contest. In the picture here, this is, gosh, I forgot her name, W6TAI. She holds, I think she may hold the top limited rover score in YLRL contests. She definitely holds one of the division records, possibly two. I looked at her score and I'm like, I'm never going to get that kind of score. She's related to Wayne N6NB, and I'll bring up why she's got such a good score later. Okay, how does one qualify as a rover? As a general rule, there's 3 criteria. Must operate from 2 or more different grid squares during a contest. A rover must identify as a rover by saying, like in my case, Kilo 2 Echo Zulu rover, Kilo 2 Echo Zulu stroke rover, or use a /R on CW. Unfortunately, a lot of the ops on CW don't know the / character. it's a headache sometimes. When they try and make it an X and an E or a D, and you know, I stopped trying them. Back when I got licensed, repeaters had to identify with a /R, so that's how I know the character, to be honest, otherwise I wouldn't have. Okay, and the last thing is all equipment and operators for a rover must be transported by a single vehicle. Now that vehicle could be your sneakers and a backpack, walk around, that's got to be a single op in that case. It could be a bicycle. It could be your car. Most people tend to think of that. It could be a tractor trailer. And as far as I know, a freight train could be a single vehicle. Okay, rovers can be simple, okay? You know, I've had pictures up here, and people know my rover's got a bunch of stuff on it. But your basic rover, and there's a lot of rovers that fall into this category, is you really need a multi-mode rig, one that does weak signal mode, single sideband. Your power source, that could be a battery, it doesn't have to be the car, or it could be the vehicle. Some small horizontally polarized antenna, which could be a Yagi or an Omni. And just for a moment, weak signal is typically done with horizontal polarization. It's easier to mount on antennas, and the losses are less through these propagation modes and through over-terrain features. It's got a little bit of benefit. In repeaters and handhelds, it's easier to have a vertical whip, so the convention on those is to do vertical polarization. All that in this setup here has got looks like an SUV, a little tripod with a mast on it. In this case, a little 4-element Yagi. Looks like 2 meters to me. And it's got a little chair there and some sort of rig sitting on the chair. That constitutes a rover. Operates a grid square, packs it all up, works over to another grid square. And I'll take a moment, another thing that's focused for rovers is grid corners. You know, the grids are square, so naturally there's corners. Well, if there's a grid corner there, I can kind of stand here and work you, and then kind of roll over to the next one. It's not quite that simple, because there's usually a rule that says you have to move at least 100 yards or something. So it's more like run over to the next one and then, you know, give out some extra points. But out in Indiana, I went on a rove. I picked a grid corner, and it had a road that went right around the corner. It was nice and small, you know, a little half-mile loop. Of course, I found out that 2 segments of that was like a farmer's field when I actually got out there. And it was muddy, and there was a house, and it didn't quite look like public. And I either had to do that or a 10-mile loop. So I waited until just before the contest started to get to the one grid, because just 2 roads covered the other 3. I drove down there real quick, worked a few stations, and backed up before they got me. On the antennas, various loops. I have round loops, like in the bottom right. M squared makes a rectangular loop that's omnidirectional. A lot bigger than a little whip, but essentially it's the same thing as a vertical whip. An omnidirectional antenna is just horizontally polarized. Directional antennas. A Yagi or quad can give rovers extra punch. Even a small Yagi can give you, you know, a 5-foot Yagi, give you 10, 12 dB more signal than an Omni. And so they can help out a lot. However, since most of your communications to fixed stations, you can kind of let them do the heavy lifting. Directional antennas add complexity. They may not be suitable for use in motion. You can be successful without omnidirectional antennas. want to highlight in this rover that 6 meter, he's got a little quad underneath the beam there, kind of bent up. You'll see a lot of those. N6NB kind of designed that. And, well, he made or had somebody with him make a lot of them. So the 6 meter antenna is a little bit large for driving down the road. People who tend to put them up like that will turn their antenna so the boom is a little shorter and it'll fit in the profile of the car, or they'll take it down when they're moving. I'm really getting messed up here. That's what happens when I don't look. Okay, fixed mounted directional antennas. A rotator makes the complexity of mounting a lot harder. This rover, which is N0 Lima Delta, it looks like N old when you look at it, N0 LD. This is a great example of a fixed mounted Yagis. He's got these Yagis 2 meters, 1 1/4 and 70 centimeters on top of his vehicle, tied down to the roof rack. There's no rotator. What he does is he points the whole vehicle where he wants his signal to go. He tends to go in areas where most of the hams are in just one direction, so he parks and it's all good there.
What state's he in?
Where is he going in? Because that's Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, those are Twitter birds.
Yeah, he's local. You know, the rovers, you get to know the other rovers out there.
I've never seen them.
Is that AC0RA?
No.
Oh, I might have seen
AC0RA got it. I'll tell you later. Incredible score in the CQ worldwide. Like about 10 times my score. More than 10 times. Okay, so he's also got some, at the front of his vehicle, a couple loops, and he's got guy wires, actual guy wires on the car to keep him from flopping around. You see that very common. They'll use a lot of the VHF weak signal enthusiasts will have a thin mast with a loop antenna, and they'll guy it up to their trunk and their back and stuff like that.
How fast can you go?
It depends how strong you've made the structure. I don't know what Randy N0 or LD, I don't know how comfortable he is at speed. Other rovers use a rotator. So this one here is fairly short antennas, and the ability to use antennas on moves depends on the length and how secure the mounting is, and the operator's ability to know where to point. You know, that's the problem. If you're moving the roads turn, it's a little hard to do. But it's actually not as hard as it may seem. This one could theoretically be used mobile. You can see there's some straps going to the roof rack there that seem to hold it. But since that's above the rotator, then that may be for driving, and then he may take that off when he's parked. There are people who do that. Now, Peter, VA3ELE, going out in a 70 centimeter sprint, felt the need to take a 24-foot long Yankee. Well, he won that sprint, so I guess it worked. Let's just hope that Peter didn't decide to drive down the road and rotate that thing. He did have a flag on the back. You can see how the wind was blowing where he was.
He should change his call sign to VA24ELE.
Okay, power trailers. I mean, for those that really want to do something, the trailer, you know, I said a freight train. Well, hey, a trailer on a car still works. And again, N6NB put together a bunch of tower trailers, and this looks like a La Quinta to me, right here, by the way. And then there's some real mega rovers. This is the K8 GP rover. This is in a full-size van. They got 2 operator positions in the back. In the middle of it, well, start with the mast on the rear. I think that's almost 40 foot tall. That's a pneumatic mast. And then they got a shorter crank-up mast on the front of the vehicle. Now, when they drive on site, they have to put all that up. The 6-meter antenna is too big for when they're driving, so they actually mount it to the side of the van, with elements sticking up. And then you can see some smaller antennas between the 2 masts. Those are omnis for when they're moving that they'll use. They've got great scores. They run 1,500 watts worth of power. But their system is so complex that I beat them in contests because they've had major failures a couple hours in. There are different divisions or categories. They compete in the classic Rover, which is all the bands up to 12 bands, including light. And I do limited Rover, which is low power, 200 watts or less, and only 4 bands. I'm working my way up to unlimited, to classic Rover. There's also an unlimited Rover category, which allows more operators. Typically, you can only have 2 operators. Some of them have 1. Rules vary. So why Rove? Well, maybe you can't operate from your home location because, well, VHF, I live in a valley. VHF isn't too rewarding there. You maybe have HOA rules to deal with. That can apply not just VHF, but HF, go out mobile. You can't put up a good antenna, or you got some local noise that just kind of wipes out, your ability to operate. You can get out and see the world. I mean, it's a way of contesting where you're not sitting in the shack all the time. Here I'm on a hilltop in Wyoming. This wasn't strictly a VHF operation. I did try some VHF from there. It was national parks on the air, but it made a good picture, so I thought I'd put it in there. Combined radio with a road trip, which is actually how I got into roving in the first place. I was going out to visit my daughter in Utah. I heard a VHF contest was going on, so I put stuff in the car to keep me occupied. And now I keep paying for it by having more and more stuff on my car. I look at something at Dayton or something, and I think, how can I put that on my car? You like being part of a pack. Now, here's a lot of these same antennas. This is one of N6NB's infamous Rover packs. Okay, particularly under old rules. Newer rules aren't so favorable, but definitely under old rules, where a Rover could contact another Rover as many times as they qualified, based upon grid changes and such. It really made sense to go out in a pack, and you can go to that grid corner I mentioned, and just 2 Rovers at a grid corner. On each band, there's 16 possible combinations. So if you got 4 bands like limited Rover, that's 64 QSOs right there. So there are some VHF records that were set by Wayne and his Rover packs, like that will never get broken because of current rules, and fixed stations can't even touch them. No. They didn't need that. Oh, and the Rover packs get better, but anyway, so I gotta watch my time here. I'm doing reasonably good. And last but not least, provide entertainment to the other drivers on the road. Peter VA3ELE was the one that said that, and I stole it. He said, I thought we were out there to entertain other drivers. And that's I mean, if I got 1 point in the contest for each picture taken during the contest when I'm on the road, I'd win them all. VHF contesters love rovers. You know, pickings can get pretty thin for a fixed station, particularly later on in the contest. You know, the fixed stations, well, the other fixed stations aren't moving, so you run out of those after a while. I mean, the serious fixed stations will go into meteor scatter and other modes. But pickings get thin. So rovers are somebody they can follow. And if you run APRS, like recently I drove out this area during the CQ Worldwide VHF, and I ran APRS. And like Bob, K2DRH, one of the big stations out in Illinois, put my call in APRS, watched anytime I changed grids. He had his antennas pointing at me, just looking for where I was. Rovers also often go to rare grid squares that are normally not on air. So it gives VHF operators an opportunity to work those grid squares, because there are awards like the VUCC, which is working 100 grid squares, the VHF equivalent of DXCC. Some people, though, go after 2-meter DXCC, stuff like that. By using moon bounce, they can reach around the world. So roving is a great way to become popular and be that sought-after station on VHF. And just a note, this a lot of stuff on this rover, but I noticed it's kind of repetitive, and there's like 3 sets of those bent up quad antennas. I think he just kind of put that all on there for the picture. How often can one rove? Well, in the contest, you've got 3 major YLRL contests, and I can tell you that it gets so exhausting, it's like, I'm glad there aren't more. June contest is the biggest contest for us in North America here. Except there's a lot of E-skip, so that tends to be a very much 6-meter focused contest. Or I should say there was a lot that's run on there. September sees some E-skip, that tends to be hybrid. January doesn't see much E-skip, so it's when you have to work through the bands. You work somebody on one band, and the typical thing on VHF is, what other bands do you have? Because you got your antennas now pointing at each other. It's like, let's go to next, and you just walk up through all the bands. I love doing that. And just a note, the contest, the YLRL contest, run 33 hours. Nice time duration there. There's the YLRL 222 megahertz up and distance contest. This one is one of the few that doesn't use grid squares. Rovers, when you change grid squares, still can work stations, but the scoring does not use grid squares. It just is based upon distance. CQ Worldwide VHF is in July. That was 2 weeks ago. That one's only 6 and 2 meters. And just having 6 meters, which most HF plus 6 meter rigs, well, obviously, plus 6 means they have 6 meters. And then there's the VHF, UHF, microwave spring, and fall sprints. And they're single events. A lot of them happen during the week in the evening. They're 4 hours long. 6 hours for the microwave sprint. And so there are five in the fall, 5 in the spring. I think the spring ones are better sponsored than the ones in the fall. There's also a 10 gigahertz and up contest. I've been getting emails about that since people found out I got 10 gigahertz hardware. Okay, getting started in roving. One of the things I would suggest is learn who the local players are. This made a big difference for me. I kind of poked at it, a little bit, and then I did that record 27 grid rove, which was I think 1,600 miles or something. I covered the contest period. starting in Pennsylvania, finishing in Texas. And in preparation, I went and I looked at people on the standings, found all the top operators, sent them an email and say, hey, I'm roving in your area, what kind of frequency do you operate on? And since the YLRL contests let you text message people, here's my number if you want to text me, and so on. And I got back a lot of responses. First off, top operators know the value of rovers. So some of them wanted to talk to me, some of them sent me their information, their phone numbers and stuff, and a couple of them have been really, really helpful in getting me connected with other ones. They'll also can spot you, promote you, let other people know, hey, this rover's coming out. It can be a little bit more rewarding that way because people know you're there and they'll know to look for you. Find out what other rovers might be out there. Again, they can be a resource to share. It's good making those various contacts. A footnote to the beginner, I kind of stuck this here because I didn't have any pictures for a while. It's like, if mounting antennas on a car, know how high your car now is, and watch out for this low overpasses. My highest antenna is 12 foot 6 inches. Anybody who's read that sign there sees 12 foot 1 inch. This provided a few exciting seconds, certainly was not minutes, during the June VHF contest where Rhea and 2RJ had joined me, when Waze routed us onto a parkway. Now, I'm very, very well aware of the height of the vehicle and the risk of parkways in the Northeast because you have low overpasses. So we got routed on, we're operating, I'm like, Rhea, this looks suspiciously like a parkway. In time, not for this underpass, there was one, it had a nice big arch in it, so it was obvious we could fit through that arch. And then I'm like, well, okay, how far do we have to go, Rhea? 32 miles. And unfortunately, we were trying to route around traffic and we had a tough call. We could have got off the highway, but we would have lost on the contact. And worst comes to worst, we could have stopped here. Worst comes to worst. But, so we found a way to get off that was only 15 miles down and decided to run on the highway. I already, having been through this drill the first time, not really conscious of it, and I knew my height was around 11 feet. On a different parkway, I came across 10 foot 7 inches. But there was a good arc, so that was okay. The next one that said 8 foot 8 inches was a different story. I managed to fit under the far left lane and went, but I don't go on that road anymore.
How do you turn around if you decide you can't go?
We would have had to stop and figure out how to get something lower on the car. But as we came up on here, I see this sign, I did a quick mental calculations, I'm thinking, I got this. Meanwhile, Rhea, who knows that we're 12 foot 6 inches, is going, 12 foot 1, 12 foot 1, 12 foot 1. And I'm like, I know. See, my mental calculation already said is, okay, there's not much arc there. I'm like, so, but there's got to be at least 6 inches, 12 foot 1. I'm like, there's probably some margin in what they put on the sign too. And the top 6 inches on my rover is a flexible whip. So I figured there was at least 6 inches there, and even if I hit another 6 inches, all I had to do was get between the two lanes. Easier said than done. There's a car, like often, they kind of come up, they look like they're going to pass, and then they decide they have to take a picture. So there's a car sitting off the corner, so I couldn't just change lane. So I go to hit the brakes as we're coming up on this. That car decided it was going to hit the brakes too. Didn't know why I was hitting the brakes, but it decided to hit the brakes too. Or maybe they decided they didn't want to lose that picture opportunity. I don't know. So then I'm going heavier on the brakes. This is while Rhea's saying 12 for 1, 12 for 1. And I'm like, I know. I'm trying to get this car to go past. So I get heavier and then cut over and went through underneath. And so a few exciting seconds. Okay, learn the contest rules. Look at the rules for the specific contest. They're all rules about the rover category. The bands that are allowed vary depending upon what class you go in. Number of operators, classic and power levels. Classic rover versus limited rover. Limited rover is good for a starter, beginner. Unlimited rover like N0LD runs there because they have 3 ops in the car. I think he also likes that category because there's not many people in it, so it's easier to get a top score than limited rover, which is a bit more competitive, even though it's just there's more participants. And classic rover is also competitive. Assistance rules vary. Yeah, YLRL contests, you can text message people, you can go onto a chat page, so you can set up skeds in real time. Prior to those rules, you could make a sked, say I'm going to be on, I'm going to look for you at this time, and arrange things and have times. Anything can be done in advance. You could also sell spot in YLRL rules. CQ worldwide doesn't allow that. Rovers can still run APRS, but that's about it. Family rule applies to the YLRL contests. I'm not sure about the CQ contests, but generally speaking, in a contest, the equipment used for one station can only be used by that one station. So a rover, your vehicle, your antenna, your radio, everything in that rover is one station. However, the YLRL, recognizing families probably don't have multiple radios for every operator family, allows multiple family members to use the same equipment in contest. Well, that means, husband-wife pair, or a child with their parent. If they're all licensed, each one can use the same equipment. And so you could have a rover that operates under two call signs. And as it moves, it can work on one, hand the mic to the other. The person has to be in there. And also, since they're all considered separate stations, they're not 2 operators the same station, they're the same separate operator. So you can have a rover that becomes even more attractive when you change grids. Now everybody can work it twice. It's totally legit in the rule. Now remember those rover packs? He also liked to stack those rovers with couples. So those 7 rovers were more like 10 rovers. I could just imagine what the Leah family would be able to do as a rover. With, husband, wife, and 4 kids, 3, all hams.
Wait till my trip is still licensed.
So that one's some odds and ends here. ON4 KST has chat pages. They say Region 1, Region 2, Region 3. In North America, we're in Region 2. Region 1 is Europe. Region 3, I believe, is Asia Pacific area. And on those chat pages, even away from contests, but particularly during contests and sprints, people go on and they'll say, calling CQ this frequency, pointing this way. Somebody will come by, well, point at me, and you can do real-time skeds. What you can't do on any of these things is say, thank you for the contact. You can't acknowledge the contact. You can't be on there saying, okay, I hear you now. You can't be doing that things. You can't be saying, okay, now just send this information. But you can say, I'm on this frequency, I'll go meet you there. And then you have to try and make the contact. If you're using directional antennas, bring a compass. I've had this problem. Don't trust the iPhone app. It somehow likes to reverse things occasionally, and then the pointing don't work so well. Phone app can track your 6-digit grid. You know, GPS would do that. The reason for the 6-digit is people will ask you what your grid. If you work them on 2 meters and now you're going to go up to 222 megahertz, 432 megahertz, or higher, they'll want to get, the beams get tighter and tighter, so they'll want to know what your 6-digit grid is. I use Repeater Book as my main app because it gives you the 6-digit grid when you go there. It's like, okay, it's convenient. There's another app, but it was little tiny print.